Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and set us up live on Facebook and then we'll get started. All right. Well, welcome everyone that is here with us today. If you pre-registered for the webinar, you'll be able to participate in the Q&A. So if you have questions during the presentation, go ahead and use the Q&A function, type your questions in there. I'll be monitoring those. We are also live on Facebook. So for those of you that are watching us on Facebook, this is a pre-registered webinar, so you won't be able to comment directly to the speaker, but if you leave your comments in the box below the video, I will be sure to follow up after the presentation today. I hope you're all here to learn about palms, but real quick, I just wanted to do an introduction. My name is Alyssa Vinson, and I am the residential horticulture agent for the Manatee County Extension Office. And if you are new to our programs, I wanted to quickly cover what is Extension. We are a function of the land grant university system, which in Florida there are two, the University of Florida and the Florida Agricultural Mechanical University, FAMU, are the two land grant universities in the state of Florida. And what we do at Extension is we work to take the research that's conducted at these universities and make it accessible and relevant to the everyday lives of our community. And then the overall mission then is for those people to use that information, that research, that knowledge that's gained up at the educational institutions to enhance the quality of their lives. So there are 67 extension offices throughout the state in every county throughout the state. And different counties have different programs, but they're all fairly similar. Here in Manatee County, we have a wide variety of programs that we offer, including our residential horticulture program, which includes our Master Gardener Volunteer Program. We have over 109 active volunteers in our program. We have a Sea Grant program that focuses on marine fisheries and coastal habitats. We have livestock programs. We have programs that work specifically with youth, our 4-H program. We have programs that cover money management in the home, food and nutrition, all kinds of different aspects of daily life. And when we look at the impacts of Extension to the local community, we can see that for 2019, we had over $2 million in value for new licenses and CEUs provided to pesticide license holders. Over $860,000 of value in volunteer time. And again, that's our Master Gardener Volunteer Program, who alone, they donate over 10,000 hours of their time every year to providing education to our community, as well as 4-H volunteers and other county volunteers. 28,000 youth were educated through our 4-H program, and over 14 million gallons of water were saved to Manatee County Utilities customers. So I think you can see that we have a very broad variety of impacts to the community, and we're happy to provide you with these educational opportunities. Today, you're going to be hearing from one of our Master Gardener volunteers who is our local palm guru. I'm going to go ahead and let her share her screen, and she's going to talk to you all today about palm care. And I'm sure that you will enjoy the presentation.
Thank you, Alyssa. Let me just get cranked up here. Okay. Everybody see that okay? All right. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. As Alyssa said, my name is Amy Stripe. I've been a Manatee County Master Gardener volunteer for the last 12 years. And I'm also a member of the International Palm Society. So for those of you who are palm aficionados. You should definitely check them out at palms.org. That's PALMS.org. So today is part 2 of a 3-webinar series on palms. Last week we talked about palm biology and how palms are different from other ornamental plants. We also identified some characteristic biological things about or morphology features about some specific species. We covered quite a few of those last week. And so today is on palm care. So today we're going to cover planting, fertilizing, and pruning. And then a week from today is part 3, which is going to be diseases, disorders, pest insects of palms, and then goofy things that palms do that are perfectly normal. So, oops, sorry about that. So much of the material presented today has been drawn from publications and presentations by Dr. Tim Brochot and Dr. Monica Elliott. They are now retired, but they were the University of Florida's top palm experts. So today's agenda, I'm just going to cover a little bit about what we covered last week in case some of you didn't join us last week, and just maybe as a reminder for other folks how palms are different from broadleaf trees or hardwood trees. And then, like I mentioned before, planting, fertilizing, and pruning. So palms are monocots. That means they have a single seed leaf. They have one growing point. Now the picture on your right is a cross section of a palm trunk or stem, as it's more accurately called. And you can see that there's a lot of fibrous tissue in there. That represents the bundles of xylem and phloem, the vascular system of the palm. Xylem is what carries water within the plant, and phloem is what carries food. Now, unlike a hardwood trees have separate bands or rings of xylem and phloem, and they add additional rings of xylem and phloem every year as they grow. In a palm tree, these bundles, they're kind of like fiber optic cables. It's once and done. They have no secondary growth at all. Now you see the pseudobark there, it's called pseudobark because it's not really true bark, but it is a kind of a little outer layer of dead tissue. Palm stems or trunks, of course, reach their maximum diameter before they start to elongate vertically. So you can see these 2 coconut palms have a full head of hair on them. They have full canopies, but they haven't begun to develop trunks very far along yet, I should say. The picture on the right, you can see that palm stem wounds are permanent. So don't use your climbing spikes on your palm trees to get up to the canopy to prune it. Don't nail Christmas lights on there. Those wounds will never heal, and in fact can create a great opportunity for disease or pest insects to get into the palm. Now on hardwood trees, of course, hardwood tree wounds typically will compartmentalize and grow over. Roots on palms are entirely adventitious. That means in the case of palms, they arise from the trunk or the stem of the palm, and then they connect from there up to those bundles of xylem and phloem. In some cases, this root development can be pretty enthusiastic. You can see this on this Washingtonia palm here. It's actually grown so many roots that it's caused that pseudobark to flare out like that. That's a perfectly normal thing. It's nothing to get alarmed about. It's just kind of a normal thing that particular species likes to do. The picture on the right shows a pygmy date palm. This is very typically, unfortunately, of a nutritional deficiency that we see. Palms are highly susceptible to a number of nutrient deficiencies, and some of them are fatal. Both macro and micronutrients are required by palms, and when we use those terms macro and micro, it doesn't mean that one is more important than the other. It's just that in the case of macronutrients, they need those nutrients in larger quantities. With micronutrients, they need them much smaller quantities. Okay, quickly, palm construction. These are the parts of the palm. Starting there on your left, lower left, the stem is actually, the trunk is actually called a stem more typically. Don't forget that this is a monocot. The canopy is more normally called a crown in a palm tree. And then that spear leaf, that's the newest emerged leaf that's unfurled, it hasn't opened yet. And some palms are quite enthusiastic about developing new leaves. And so sometimes you'll look at a palm and you'll go, wait, that's got more than one spear leaf. Well, it doesn't. There's only really one newest leaf. It just happens to have kind of a secondary spear and a tertiary spear leaf. They just have not unfurled as yet. Now the apical meristem, that's the bud or the heart or the growing point of the palm. That's where all the new leaves develop. If the apical meristem becomes damaged, like maybe from cold or something like that, the new leaves might come out looking kind of strange, and it might take a while, it might take up to a year or maybe more for it to go back to a more natural habit of growth. The frond on a palm tree is a single leaf. And in the case of this particular graphic, this is a pinnate type of leaf, a feather type palm. Those little leaflets, those little green things are called leaflets. If this were a palmate type palm or a fan palm, where the leaves are shaped like this, those green bits are called segments. Then the root initiation zone, that's where the roots begin, like I showed you in that picture with the flared base on the Washingtonia. That is the base of the palm, the root initiation zone. Now, what we typically do is with our customers, we often will, to help determine what's going on with the palm, we divide this canopy or this crown in two, like this, right through the middle. And that tell us that this is all new growth at the top. Those are all newer leaves. At the bottom, these are all the older leaves. So we're going to take a quick quiz now based on what you know so far. So this is a good idea or bad idea question. So the picture on the left is two landscape company guys are staking a palm, and they're using, I think those are called angle irons. I'm not really sure what they're called, but they're those funky shaped metal things. And the one guy's using a sledgehammer to pound that thing up against that palm. So the question for you today is, that looks good, that looks okay, or maybe not so hot? All right, and then the picture on the right, this lady is holding a box of Miracle Grow. Miracle Grow is a fast released type fertilizer, instant release, I should say, completely water soluble, and it contains macros, and it contains a few micros as well. So do you think this should do the trick for your palm, or probably not? So I'll give you guys a couple of minutes, or 1 minute maybe. Has everybody voted? Okay.
Got 21 people have voted, so.
Okay. We still have a few more.
All right, I'm gonna end the polling now.
Okay. Okay, so the two guys on the left, I actually pulled this from YouTube. It was a demonstration by a landscape company, not in Florida, I might add, demonstrating how to stake a newly installed palm. And the guy even went so far as to say that, he actually he said, you know, for those of you who think this might be harmful for the tree, don't worry, it's not harmful. Well, truthfully, this is not the way the University of Florida recommends you stake a newly installed palm. But I must say that, you know, this guy maybe does this often enough that he knows just how far in that pseudo bark he can jam that thing in there. But I don't think that's a very good idea, and I'm sure the university would agree. Now, the lady with the Miracle Grow, yeah, no, Miracle Grow, nothing against Miracle Grow, but it is a completely soluble product, and for palms, we really want something that has more time release, especially with the macronutrients, and then it really doesn't have enough of those micros to make a difference. Now, just I don't know how many of you are in what part of the state, but here in Manatee County, we do have a fertilizer ordinance with regard to nitrogen, and nitrogen has to be in a time release, at least 50% of it in time release formulation to be put down in landscapes here in Manatee County. So this would not do here. Okay, so planting palms, you want to pick the right site. Now this poor spindle palm on the left here, that's a bad location. It's in the middle of turf grass, and I'm sure a lot of you can come up with like 2 or 3 reasons right off the bat why that's not a good idea. First of all, the turf grass is going right up against the trunk or stem of that palm. So there's not a lot of, that's going to be real poor soil aeration there. You're not going to get a lot of good gas exchange with the root system. The second reason is because whoever maintains this landscape, if they're using a string trimmer, a strimmer, weed whacker, call it what you will, if they're using that to edge their grass, they could potentially damage the stem of that palm with that tool. Another reason is that obviously this is getting hit with an overhead type of sprinkler system that's for the turf grass, but it's hitting the trunk of this particular, or stem of this particular palm, and that really looks like it's setting up some kind of nasty looking rot there. Another reason that we'll get into later in more detail is that they're probably applying a high nitrogen fertilizer to that turf grass, and that can cause serious problems on palm trees if you're not compensating for that high nitrogen. And we'll talk about that later. Now the middle photo, this queen palm, okay, this is a better location. You've got less turf grass, but this is way too much mulch. Again, you don't want to mulch any plant this way right up against, you know, the trunks or stems of plants because of the aeration scenario. Now the third picture on the far right there, that's probably as good as can be expected in like a home landscape. But a couple of things to note about planting things under palms. Most ground covers, for example, cannot handle the high rate of fertilization that palm trees require. So you might see ground covers under, you know, palms that are getting fertilized properly, not looking too great. The other thing is, I'm sure, how many of us have tried to do this, to plant like a shrub or something underneath a palm? Well, of course, on a mature palm, you know, once it's established, that root system is very dense, very fibrous, very shallow, and goes out really pretty far away from the base of that stem. So it makes digging a hole pretty tough. Now, you want to pick the right season, of course. Winter planting is not recommended for non or only marginally cold hardy species. Now here in Manatee County, some of those species would include like your royal palms, your pygmy dates, your coconut, Christmas palm, foxtail palm, areca, plus many others. If you live at the beach in Manatee County, that might be better. The main reason why winter planting is not recommended is because when a field-grown palm, when it's grown in the ground, in the field, at the nursery, when it's dug up, a lot of those roots do not survive, of course. And so the thing that really has to happen with a palm is root regeneration. Wintertime, cold weather is not conducive to rapid root regeneration. Now, of course, if you live in South Florida, your planting window is much bigger, and you certainly have a much longer sort of menu of species to choose from because you're warmer. You know, most palms are tropical or subtropical. And then if you're in Northern Florida, it's just the opposite, just the flip side. You got to be real careful in terms of your choice of palm species, and then you really want to make sure you're planting in the warmer months. So just to remind everybody, you know, when we refer to zones for a palm species, what we're talking about is its ability to survive at the average annual extreme minimum temperature. So if you are looking at a palm species that says it's cold hardy to 10B and up, you certainly don't want to plant it in A, and you might want to think twice about planting it in 9, maybe warmer parts of 9, or if you have like a little microclimate in your yard, or maybe you want to plant it on the southern exposed part of your yard, something like that. But that's what we mean by cold hardiness zones. Now, key considerations for planting palms. Now, this is for field-grown palms, okay? Not grown in containers, but grown in the ground, in the field. Large palms will transplant relatively easily. Some species will have a loss of up to 30% of them, but the most critical, important cause of palm failure on transplantation is water stress. So that usually translates to water loss or transpiration through the leaves. Now, as gruesome as this sounds, the best practice is when you go to dig up the palm out of the field for transplanting is to remove 1/2 to 2/3 of the oldest leaves. And then you can see in the picture on the far right there of this Canary Island date palm, then you just bundle those together for transportation to keep the remaining leaves safe. Kind of looks gruesome. I guess I had to shake my head at that one. Now, roots of field-grown palms, of course, that get severed have to be regenerated. So that exacerbates that water loss situation because you've now got a bunch of roots that aren't really doing their normal job until they regrow. So they can't take up water very easily. Now, adding more water is not going to solve that problem, of course, because there are no roots there yet to take that up. Just a little aside here, somebody last week's webinar asked me about pruning these Canary Island date palms this way. They sometimes call these pineapple palms because it resembles a pineapple when they start pruning away leaves. And my answer to the question was that, yes, if it's a dead leaf, you can certainly take that off. If it's a live leaf, no, do not. If you take live leaves off of Canary Island date palms, that kind of wounded section there will exude a chemical that attracts a really nasty pest insect, which we'll talk about next week. That's your teaser. But then I started thinking about it, and I went back and I looked at some of Dr. Broschot's writings on this, and he said, you know, and sometimes even on a dead leaf, a little bit of that leaf base is left behind, and he said just wait for that to fall off naturally, and then you'll get that nice little diamond look. But don't try to force the issue by yanking it off. All right. So roots regenerate differently or varies by species. I don't know how many of you have seen a bunch of cabbage palms or sable palmettos on the back of a flatbed truck being driven around to their transplant location. The first time I saw that, it just astounded me because first of all, they had hardly any leaves left on them. And then I looked at the root ball and I said, that's teeny tiny. How can that possibly work? Well, here's the story with cabbage palms. No existing roots of field-grown cabbage palms survive being dug up or being cut. So it's pointless to drag a big heavy root ball all around town when none of those roots in there are going to live. And so because of that, they solved that problem by cutting off most of the leaves. It's quite remarkable to see. Now, the other reason is that because of that root regeneration thing, you cannot plant a cabbage palm that hasn't already started developing a trunk or stem because it has to have that root initiation zone, otherwise it will not survive. The same holds true with the Bismarck palm, but for a different reason. The Bismarck palm has very deep kind of vertical roots. It has fewer sort of lateral roots on it. And they recommend that when you plant or you dig up or transplant a Bismarck, you wait until it has at least some stem or trunk on it because you want to keep those roots intact for anchorage, because this guy is really one of those palm species that is susceptible to windage, to getting blown over by wind. A coconut palm, on the other hand, is an example of a palm species that can be transplanted prior to trunk development easily at any time. Okay, if you are planting a container palm, one that's been grown in a pot, and if you yank it out of that pot and you see the roots wrapping around, that is not a problem with your palms, because in palms, old roots die to make way for new roots. So you can see in that picture on the right, there's a bunch of new root initials there that have developed in response to being transplanted. Now, this girdling that you see in the left here of hardwood trees and even on shrubs, this is bad news, but you don't have to worry about that on your palm tree, or palm, I should say, not a tree. Okay, planting depths. You want to plant at the same depth as the root ball. This is with a field-grown palm, okay? Plant at the same depth as the root ball. You want to bury only the visible portion of the root initiation zone. So going back to this picture, you want to plant this like up to here, This is what you want to be underground. And the reason for that is because these guys, these root initials here, do not survive unless they're in contact with soil. So if you remember on that picture I showed you with the flared base, the root initiation zone, all of those roots were dead because they weren't in contact with the soil. The planting hole should be wide enough to accept the root ball, but no deeper than the root ball. And you want to make sure there's no standing water in the bottom of the planting hole. So if you have a yard that doesn't drain well, or even if you have a high water table in your landscape, you want to maybe consider building up a bed or a berm to plant that palm. You want to make sure you keep that out of the water, that root ball. Okay, planting depth. You got to be just right. You can't be too shallow. You can't be too deep, because that will create some problems. So the picture on the left is a containerized palm. It's been planted. It's been grown in a container. And what happened in this case is it was planted too shallowly to begin with, and then the soil subsided somewhat within the pot. So those root initials, once you transplant that, they will probably never live. They probably are completely dead. So that's an example of a container palm. Now with container palms, you want to plant them up about an inch below the level of the soil in the container. Unlike most other plants where you always try to plant it a little bit above, with palms, you want to make sure that you have that root initiation zone is definitely in contact with soil. Now the picture on the right was a field grown palm, and you can see quite clearly here where it broke off. This was above ground, so it broke off right here, which means that all of this region here, this is the root initiation zone, was left above ground. It was not planted in the ground, so it just sort of fell over by its own weight. Now, this is more typical of what we see is palms being planted too deep. And I know this is going to sound kind of wacky, but this is what happens sometimes. Somebody wants to plant a nice row of palms, and they want them to all be the same height. And they come in from the nursery, and they're not all the same height. So they might plant one or two a little more deeply to make sure that they're all even. It's amazing how often this happens. With cabbage palms, the other thing that happens is because they don't have a big root ball, when they come in from the nursery, sometimes rather than staking them, people just plant them very deeply, thinking that's going to keep them from falling over. So that does happen. Now the Phoenix Dak here on the right, that's a date palm. Those two individuals were planted at the same time. But it just so happens that the guy that's not looking very good there on the left was planted too deep. It might take several years for this to manifest itself. You might see things like iron deficiency, or manganese deficiency is another common one. You might even have drought stress. Even though you've got plenty of irrigation, you might have drought stress because that root is now too deep. It's not getting enough air exchange with the outside, and could possibly be rotting. So it's just not, the root system is not functioning as it should. Now, when you're done with your planting, of course, you want to brace larger palms for the first 6 to 8 months. No nails being driven into the trunk itself, no wire bands touching that trunk or stem. What the university recommends is that you use kind of 2x4s, these little chunks right here, and then you attach the bands to those 2x4s, and then you over either asphalt paper or maybe even burlap, something like that. So none of that comes into direct contact with the stem, and then you nail your braces, your upright braces, to those 2x4s. So you want to keep it evenly moist, but never saturated for 4 to 6 months. And if you plant during the dry season, you may find yourself having to water every day for the first month or so. But again, never saturated. Don't just lay a hose down there and forget it. You want to make sure you know how much water is going down there. You don't want to fertilize until at least 3 to 4 months after installation, because of course, there's not enough roots there to take up the nutrients. So what's the point of putting that down? Speaking of fertilizing, okay, those of you who have seen my presentations before can just repeat after me. I hear some eye rolling out there. Palms are more likely to suffer from and die of nutritional deficiencies than from diseases or pest insects. Diseases and pest insects are somehow a lot faster in many cases. They're, I don't know, they're somehow sexier because they're faster. I don't know. But really, if you have a problem, if you're seeing a problem on the palm and it's not an obvious thing like a bug that you can see, the first place you want to go to is nutrition. That's the first question you want to ask yourself is this a nutritional issue? Here's one of my mini pet peeves coming up, just warning, fertilizer is not food. So Miracle-Gro, that label that said plant food, no, it's fertilizer. It's fertile in much the same way that you would take a vitamin supplement. That's basically what nutrients do for palms. So palms, like other plants, produce their own food. They produce their own phloem, their own carbohydrates, their own sugars, whatever you want to call it. So just keep that in mind. Now, of course, the way that nutrients function in palms is for their overall health and growth, you know, natural growth. So they fulfill functions like, photosynthetic production or chlorophyll production, cell division, stuff like that, but it's not food. So when you see nutritional deficiencies in palms, they will manifest themselves on the leaves, and they will manifest themselves in ways that are characteristic to that particular nutrient deficiency. And we'll go over that in just a second. But know that leaf symptoms will remain forever. So this is a typical potassium deficiency you see in this photo. You can't green up those leaves. You're going to have to wait for new growth of nutritionally sufficient leaves. Now, there is one exception to this. Iron can be applied as a foliar spray on the leaves to green up, but it's only a temporary fix. You really have to fix, why do I have this, this nutritional deficiency of iron? And it's probably because it was planted too deep. So it may take 2 to 3 years to replace the whole canopy, to get all sufficient, all nice green leaves in the whole canopy. So your goal is to prevent these deficiencies from even happening. Now, pH of your soil makes a big difference in terms of how well plants can take up nutrients that are present. So this is a pH chart on your far, of course, on your far left is the more acid part of pH, and then on the far right is more alkaline. So the bands, the color bands those are all the elements or the nutrients or minerals, call it what you will, but these are the nutrients. And then the width of the band obviously represents the ability of the plant to take up, or the availability, I should say, of that particular nutrient in that particular range of alkalinity. So if you look at nitrogen, the green one here at the top, look at the nitrogen one, look at potassium, that's another macronutrient. Look at magnesium, another macronutrient. Those 3 macronutrients you can see are not really available much in acidic soils. If you look at some micros like iron here, manganese or copper and zinc, they're pretty readily available in acid soils, very available in the case of iron, of course, but not so available in the alkaline end of things. And the alkaline end of things is pretty much our soil in Florida as a general rule. That's another teaser coming up. Okay, so in spite of the pH having a great deal to do with it, in our maintained landscapes, the #1 reason why we have nutritional deficiencies is because we are not fertilizing properly. So especially when we're using turf fertilizers with high nitrogen content. Now, turf fertilizers are typically high in nitrogen because nitrogen causes new growth, and we're constantly mowing turf grass, so it does need a lot of nitrogen. But if you apply it in the vicinity of your palms, and your palms take it up, it can cause some really bad problems. On palm trees, it can actually kill a palm tree if it gets too much nitrogen in the absence of those other nutrients. It becomes deficient in those other nutrients. These pictures are examples of where Dr. Brochat induced a deficiency on palms. On the left is a classic case of potassium deficiency, and then you look at your Phoenix robelina here, pygmy, and that's classic magnesium deficiency. But just to kind of show you what those look like. So what nutrients are commonly deficient on palms? Well, in order of incidence, potassium, the #1, followed by magnesium, then manganese, then boron, and then iron and nitrogen. Now, iron, again, rarely in a landscape palm. It's only really in cases where it's planted too deep that you might see iron deficiency. However, in container palms, so if you keep your palms in pots, you will find that nitrogen and iron are the #1 deficiencies. So looking at your landscape as a whole, what are some common deficiencies in other things in your landscape? So in turf grass, nitrogen and iron are going to be 2 of the most common deficiencies. If you're looking at your broadleaf trees and shrubs, you're going to have magnesium, iron, potassium, manganese, and nitrogen being deficient. Palms, all of the above, including boron. So palm deficiencies include all of the common turf, broadleaf tree, and shrub deficiencies. If you fertilize your palms correctly, you may correct all the deficiencies in your yard. Isn't that handy? But we don't recommend you do that because you don't want to apply specialty palm fertilizer to your turf grass that's, you know, not in the vicinity of your palm trees, because it's simply just too expensive. So how do I tell which of these is deficient? Inside plants, some nutrients are transportable from, can be transported to areas within the plant that have, you know, greater demands, like the growing point, and we call those mobile nutrients. So if you look here at the top, I got nitrogen, potassium, and magnesium, the macros. Those are mobile, and they can translocate. It's called translocation from old to new leaf tissue. So the new leaf tissues where the growing point is, and it's basically scavenging those nutrients from those older leaves if it is deficient in those nutrients. Could one of these cause a fatality? One of these deficiencies cause a fatality? Usually only in the case of potassium. And then you will see these deficiencies showing up in the very low pH, very acid soils like we saw on our little colored bar chart of nutrients. Now, boron, iron, and manganese are micro nutrients. They are not mobile. They stay where they are. A deficiency of one of these can definitely cause a fatality in a palm, and they will show up in very high or alkaline soils. You will see that, which we also saw on our chart. A deficiency will show up, as we saw a couple slides ago, with visible symptoms characteristic, again, of that nutrient deficiency. So the location of the leaf symptoms within the crown is very indicative of what nutrient is deficient. So if you were to have a K deficiency, a potassium deficiency, where would you see that in the canopy? You would see that in the older leaves, right? Because it is translocating that potassium from the older leaves to the newer leaves. So we very often with our customers, we draw the lollipop, the palm tree with its stem, and we just cut it in half and we point out the newer leaves are at the top. That's where you will see symptoms of iron, manganese, and boron deficiency. Older leaves at the bottom of the crown, that's where you will see the nitrogen, the potassium, and the magnesium deficiencies. It's really not important. I mean, the solution is going to be the same for a homeowner in terms of correcting the problem, but it's good to know what these deficiencies look like so that you can say it's not a mechanical injury, it's not a disease, so it's something nutritional. But I'll just go through this kind of quickly. There's excellent university publications on each and every one of these palm deficiencies with great pictures. So you can always go back to the electronic data information system at the University of Florida. Their website has lots and lots of these great publications on palms. Starting at the upper left, these are across the top, we're just going to look at macros. This is a classic potassium deficiency. Remember, potassium, it affects oldest leaves, and it affects the oldest part of the oldest leaf. So that's when you see the tips on those leaflets. That's the oldest part of that leaf, or the leaflet, and the oldest part of the leaf is also the tip of that leaf. So that's why you see dead tissue there. That is potassium deficiency. The Canary Island date palm, this is such a common and sad sight, I can't even tell you. But this is both a magnesium and a potassium deficiency, very, very common. So the lower part of of the crown, those, you can see the necrosis, the dead bits, that is the potassium. Then this classic kind of green V shape here is definitely magnesium. No necrotic tissue at all, just very yellow margins, and then this kind of V-shaped green bit in the middle. And look at this, folks. Draw a line right through that, and boy, this all looks good. This new growth looks good. This is the old growth. That's a classic scenario of mobility. The spindle palm over here, that is a nitrogen deficiency. I think this is, now I think this is Dr. Elliott's palm. In fact, it was. I remember her telling us this. She had just started doing palm trees as a scientist, and she had her mother coming to visit, and she had a few leaves that were symptomatic of deficiency. They still had some green in them, but they were kind of looking like this or like this. And her mom was coming to visit, and she thought, there's no way I can let my mother see this horrible looking stuff on my palm. So she proceeded to cut off any leaf that was symptomatic. And so she was left with very little growth on here. But what this is nitrogen. And so you can kind of see through here. This is the spear leaf. This is the newest leaf, and it's still kind of green. But this is kind of uniform, light green coloration, obviously lacking in vigor. That's nitrogen. Now here on the bottom, these are all micros. They all affect the newest leaves. So these are lady palms that are growing in containers. And notice that they're growing in a greenhouse because they do like shade. But this is not sunburn. This is iron deficiency. You see these green veins surrounded by yellow. Now, if you look at this palm, these are old leaves. So it's the newest leaves that are looking mighty bad here. So I think probably what happened was they were fertilizing these and with an automatic irrigation system, and somehow this row got missed out and this one didn't. But anyway, so now on manganese, manganese is on new growth. It comes out mostly necrotic. You get this thing called frizzle top. This queen palm's a goner because one of these is the spear, probably that one, and it's dead. So that effectively that palm is dead. Boron deficiency is really wacky. Boron deficiency causes like distortions like this, like you see here, multiple unopened spear leaves. Sometimes you get this accordion sort of look or corrugated look on the leaflets. I think you could probably correct this if you had enough patience, enough time. Okay, so I knew you were sitting there going, okay, what's the answer? What do I do? What do I do? Okay, here's what you're gonna do. You're gonna use a balanced specialty palm fertilizer. Spot treatment of those individual nutrient deficiencies can actually kill a palm. Now, if you have somebody that looks after your landscape who is an arborist or a horticulturalist or a palm expert or what have you, they probably will be able to treat individual deficiencies. But as a homeowner, I'm letting somebody else do that thinking for me, i.e. Dr. Broshot, and I'm just gonna go with his formula. The reason is because some of these elements are what they call antagonistic. They fight each other. So like if you have too much nitrogen, you'll build up a potassium deficiency. If you have too much potassium, you might get a magnesium deficiency. The ratio actually of NK and Mg should be 2 to 3 to 1. Don't worry about that. This is an old slide. I should have taken that off. But then also some elements can be toxic. Boron, for example, palms require very, very, very little boron. We have a great story, actually it's not so great, but one of our agents years and years ago went to her dentist office, I believe it was, and she told them that there were palms in their parking lot that had a boron deficiency. So, and she left it at that. And then the next time she went back, they were all dead, and she asked them what happened, and they said, oh, we threw some 20 mule team borax down on that. Well, save it for your washing machine. The other thing about borax brand is it's completely water soluble. It leaches away at the first heavy rainfall. So, okay, another pet peeve coming up here, and that's Epsom salts. I cannot tell you how many times, and I know Master Gardeners out there watching can relate to this, how many times I've had a customer come in and say, my neighbor told me I had a magnesium deficiency, so that I should use Epsom salts. Epsom salts are magnesium sulfate. Save it for your bath. Actually, I have seen Epsom salts in garden centers of big box stores labeled as fertilizer. But here's the story with that. Again, that is 100% water soluble. It's not going to stick around and release slowly, and it's just going to leach away at the first rainfall. So leave your borax, your 20 mule team for your washing machine, and your Epsom salts for your bath. Okay, so what is the, no, I won't tell you that yet. Okay, so first of all, just really quickly how to read a fertilizer bag. Those three big numbers on the front are the macros, and they are always in this order, NPK, so nitrogen, phosphate, potassium, or potash. So in this case, the 10s represent 10% nitrogen, 10% phosphate, and 10% potassium. Some fertilizer bags, the application rate, the instructions say, put down 5 pounds of nitrogen. So the way you figure that out is you say this is a 50-pound bag, and so 10% of that's going to be 5. That's just a real quick way of looking at it. So now the drum rolls. You're going to say, okay, what is the palm fertilizer I should be using? So you should be using 8-12 plus 4 magnesium with micronutrients. So 8 is the nitrogen, 2 is the phosphate, 12 is the potassium, and we put 4 magnesium up here because it is a macro. You probably won't see it on the main label, but you definitely will see it on the back of the bag or somewhere else on the label, but because we want a lot of magnesium. So that's why it is spelled out there as +4. Now, here in Manatee County, we do have a fertilizer ordinance that prohibits the use of phosphate in our landscapes. So that analysis is going to be 8-0-12 plus 4. It's not always available. It's not easy to find. Really important here, the source of elements is just as important as the ratio. And to quote Dr. Broshot, not all 8-12 plus 4s are created equal. This can be tremendously challenging. But what he says is he wants the nitrogen, the potassium, the boron, and magnesium to be in slow or controlled release form. Now, slow release generally refers to organics like manure, you know, they break down slower. A controlled release form is usually the nutrient or the mineral has had some sort of man-made compound added to it to prevent it from breaking down very quickly. Then your manganese and your iron and your other micronutrients you want in your most soluble form. And if you remember back to our pH chart, these micronutrients do not like alkaline, or they're not readily available in alkaline soil. So you want them to be in their most soluble, most easiest to take up form by your palm. Now here is the real kick in the stomach. If it's not the right fertilizer, put down no fertilizer whatsoever. So let's just look at I don't want to hear any snores out there, okay, but this is important stuff. So let's just look at a bag. LESCO happens to be a brand. They make several, a manufacturer, they make several different formulations of palm fertilizer. You want to make sure you get the right one if you're going with LESCO. There are other brands out there, obviously, but I think really to find the right formulation of 8-12 or 8-0-12, you're going to have to go to a landscape supply store. And you may have to ask a lot of questions, but if you're armed with this information, you should be good. So let's look here, 8-12. So here's our 8 of nitrogen, here's our 2 of phosphate, here's our 12 of potassium, and here's our 4 of magnesium that we want. Now, for the nitrogen, the potassium, and magnesium and boron, again, we want these to be in slow release, time release, or what have you. So what you have to do here is now go to derived from, and you'll see polymer coated urea, that's your urea nitrogen, I can say that. Polymer coated sulfate of potash, okay, polymer coated, that tells me it's time released. Then you will see also on your magnesium, you will go down and say, wait, it just says magnesium sulfate. It doesn't say that it's time released. So what happens here is that Dr. Broshot recommends the use of kieserite, which is a mineral. It is mined. It breaks down slowly. It is magnesium sulfate. And so if I go here and look at my derived from, tick off that box, my magnesium sulfate comes from kieserite. Okay. Now this is very confusing right here. This water soluble thing. Labeling laws in Florida require fertilizers to be tested in labs, and when they test certain of these in labs, they break them down If they have a coating on them, they break them down to ensure that the element or the nutrient is water soluble. That makes sense because water solubles are the only way that nutrients can get taken up by plants is through water. So if your nutrient is not water soluble, then it will not work, obviously. But this does not mean if you see water soluble that you have to really dig down here to make sure that it is in fact not leachable. But this water soluble refers to a lab test. Boron, you want slow release sodium borate. And there are several brands of sodium borate. Borax is one, Solubor is another, but Dr. Broshot recommends Granubor. It is a slow release rate for sodium borate. Well, here we're out of luck because we see boron, we see sodium borate, but we don't see Granubor. So you might just have to ask and say to the person you're buying it from, do you know what is the source of this boron? And probably it's not going to be on the label because it may not be available all the time. It may not be available at the time of manufacture in every single case. So that one's kind of tricky. Now for our micros, we want quick release forms. Remember, we want the most water soluble possible we can get. So here is, so we're looking for sulfate forms of manganese, zinc, and copper. So let's go down here. There's copper sulfate, there's manganese sulfate, there's zinc sulfate. Tick off those boxes. Your iron, you want it to be chelated. Chelated is, again, just a word to refer to adding a compound to iron to make it more dissolvable. And here we can look right here on this label, chelated iron. Tick off that box. Now, key is with these micros, you don't want to see anything that says oxide or sucrate. Oxides, like iron oxide, is rust, basically, and it will never, ever, ever be able to be taken up by any plant unless they're in soils that are so acidic the plant can't grow in it. It's filler is what it is. Sucrates are sugar-coated oxides. Again, no value there. Keep in mind that fertilizers are sold by the pound. So a lot of times you'll get fillers in here. Okay. That was the heavy lifting part, by the way, of the presentation. So everybody can take a breathe sigh of relief here. Okay, how to apply? You want to broadcast the fertilizer. It's a granular fertilizer. You want to broadcast it. None of these little tidy bands around the drip line. No. Broadcast. You don't want to use plugs, those spikes, those fertilizer spikes. You don't want to fertigate. Fertigate is where you fertilize through your irrigation system. You want to fertilize the turf within 50 feet of any palms with palm fertilizer. And that palm fertilizer is perfectly fine for landscape beds or turf grass. And of course, you do want to follow directions on the bag for the application rate. It is the law. And you do obviously want to comply with your county's fertilizer ordinance if there is any ordinances, if there are any. Okay. All right, so quick quiz coming up here. All right, so on the left, we have fertilizer application A or B, which is correct. And then on the left, we have 2 bags of fertilizer, a 1358 and a 24 something, I can't see the rest of it. It says turf fertilizer. So which one of these is correct? And you have a choice in number 2 of neither one. I'm gonna get a drink of water. Did we lose everybody or do we still have people voting?
We're about 75% voted.
Okay, this is an easy one, guys. Oh, they're all easy, come on. Okay, no, that is a fertilizer spike or plug. That is not correct because in actual fact they've done some studies on this. They've actually some data on this. you're better off putting no fertilizer than using one of these. I mean, this is not effective. It doesn't reach enough of the root system. And in fact, it could probably burn roots like in that immediate vicinity where it goes in. So yeah, B is broadcasting. That's a spreader, so that is correct. And I'm happy to say that most people got the fertilizer bag thing correct. Yeah, neither one of these works, even though you got a bag that says Palm Plus, so it must be good, right? But no, that analysis is just all wrong. You got 13 nitrogen. That's way too much nitrogen. You don't have enough potassium here, and you got way, way, way too much phosphates there. So, okay, pruning. Don't do it. Okay, I'm done. No, just most palms do require some pruning to keep them attractive and to keep them safe, because big, heavy, dead palm fronds can be injurious, to people or property. And same thing with big, fruit clusters or even like coconuts. Those things can pose hazards. So you probably do want to do some modicum of pruning. But pruning palms affects the vigor of the palm. It affects the the photosynthetic capability of the palm. Obviously affects nutritional health. We've already seen that palms store their nutrients in their leaves, and removing a green leaf is effectively removing nutrients. You can transmit diseases by pruning live leaves on palms, because if you have unclean pruning tools and you're pruning between them, you can transmit diseases. You can also attract pest insects, as we discussed in the case of the Canary Island date palm. And then, of course, you can reduce wildlife. I don't know if that's a huge concern. I'd miss my corn snakes. But you can also eliminate evidence of a problem. So let's say you have a nutritional deficiency or maybe a disease problem. By removing leaves, you may be removing the evidence. And then it can affect cold hardiness. I mean, there's some anecdotal data out there that says that if you leave the boots on, for example, cabbage palms, that makes them a little bit more cold hardy. So self-cleaners obviously need no pruning. Those with the smooth crown shafts like royal palms and foxtails and arecas and Christmas palms, they need no pruning of the leaves. So those, you just want to let them do their own deal. Now, on a self-cleaner, believe it or not, if it is nutritionally sufficient, if it has no deficiencies of nutrients, one day the old leaf will turn yellow, the next day it will turn brown, and the third day it will fall off. That's the way it's supposed to work. Now, for those of you who have foxtails out there, you're probably going, no, that doesn't work. Because it doesn't, because foxtails are almost always nutrient deficient. On my Adenidia, on the other hand, my Christmas palm, she works just like that, like clockwork. One day yellow, next day brown, next day it's fallen off, because she is, like I said, nutritionally sufficient. So now non-self cleaners may need dead leaves removed. This is a queen palm. Queen palms, the dead leaves really persist. So this obviously has had some grooming done to it. But these are dead leaf bases, and they just pretty much always stay on there. They never fall off. By the way, don't do this. This guy is volcano mulching here. We don't want that. Okay, palm abuse. This is so-called hurricane pruning. The origins of hurricane pruning, I just read this the other day, were on coconut palms, removal of coconuts during hurricane season. And that makes perfect sense, because those things could be missiles and high winds. You don't want that. So that makes sense. But unfortunately now it has evolved to this type of thing. And this is done for a number of misguided reasons. One of those is that if I remove lots of live green fronds, I'm going to reduce my future pruning requirements, right? I'm not going to have so many dead ones coming up. Well, actually, what happens is, in many, many, many cases, is leaf production increases in response to that. And also what happens is, now you've taken off, let's say this palm had a macronutritional deficiency. So now you've taken off old live leaves that we could have scavenged those nutrients from, and now they're gone. So now these, which are effectively new leaves, become now the oldest leaves. So in effect, it's just going to kill this palm, or kill that leaf a lot sooner. There's a lot left to draw from. So it really has the opposite effect. And then when you over trim like this, you get this caliper kind of reduction here, this very suboptimal looking, because you removed a lot of the photosynthetic leaves that are helping to produce, you know, the food. So it has basically been starved at this stage. And in a high wind, like a hurricane, this thing can snap off pretty easily. So another reason why they say to hurricane prune is to reduce the windage. If I have less canopy, I have less likelihood, or I have less you know, area for the wind to catch on. And so that'll, you know, keep it safe, it won't fall over. Well, let's not forget, palms or monocots, those stems are quite flexible. They bend. And then the leaflets are designed so that the wind goes right through, as opposed to a broadleaf tree, which might have, you know, leaves that where the wind hits them. In palm trees, they go right through. So all of that above is just, you know, nonsense. So you don't really want to do this hurricane pruning. Don't let anybody talk you into it. If you must, you want to never remove any live leaves above between 9 o'clock and 3 o'clock. So this poor queen palm has been pruned to within an inch of its life. And in fact, I can almost guarantee you that that will not last. I don't know when this picture was taken, but it won't last 6 months beyond this time this picture was taken. So acceptable pruning on the far left, the middle one, that's harsh, and then you get the long-term effects. You see that repeated reduction of the caliper there on the stem. By the way, you should remove no more than 25% of the functional canopy, of the live canopy, and you should never do that more than once a year. Which is why sometimes you get that severe hurricane pruning, because people are only doing it once a year. They're only paying for it once a year. Okay, what to trim? If nutritional deficiencies exist, remove only dead fronds. If it's got the least little bit of yellow or green left, leave them on. You can remove badly damaged leaves, but be very, very careful with the self-cleaners. You know, you want to make sure the self-cleaner falls off by itself. It's like pulling a hangnail off. Otherwise, you can leave some exposed wounds there. And then palms that have very few leaves left after a hurricane, even though they look raggedy, if they still have some modicum of green in them, leave them alone. Flower stalks, anytime you want. They are messy in many cases. And fruit stalks anytime, especially before a hurricane. So we got another quiz come up after this. First of all, how to remove the leaves. You want to cut the leaf bases close to, but not into the trunk. You want to sterilize your tools between trees. And like I said, do not attempt to tear off persistent leaves, either on self-cleaners or non-self-cleaners. So here's the next quiz coming up. So which guy is doing this right? The guy A, he's got a handsaw there. The guy B, he's got a chainsaw there. And I'll give you a hint. Look at what they're cutting. Okay, I'm not surprised. A lot of people think that a chainsaw is the wrong thing to use, but in fact, that's perfectly fine. The guy who's doing it wrong is the canary and date palm guy, because he's cutting off a live leaf. The guy on the right is using a chainsaw on a sable palmetto or a cabbage palm, and those are definitely dead. So it is definitely B is the correct way to do it. You really don't want to remove live leaves, and especially you look at that Canary Island date palm on the left, and he's cutting above the 9 and 3 o'clock. Okay. So one last thing on pruning: if you have a palm that is multi-trunked or a clustering palm like this, this is an areca palm. A lot of people like to keep them nice and clean. The areca palm is a self-cleaner. So sometimes when it sheds off its leaves, they sort of stay stuck in the middle there, and they can be quite messy looking. And then sometimes you want to just thin them out a bit or keep them from spreading too much. But what arborists recommend is, if you have a clustering palm, especially an areca palm, that you leave 3 to 5 feet of trunk intact, because there is a disease called Ganoderma butt rot caused by Ganoderma zonatum, a fungus that loves to colonize the lower 3 feet of palms. And so we're seeing increasingly Ganoderma on areca palms, quite possibly due to the fact that people have been cutting down at the ground level here. This is where Ganoderma loves to live. And we'll talk about Ganoderma next week. That's another teaser. It's an exciting disease. Actually, it's not. It's a terrible disease. It affects every palm, every species of palm, and it is fatal. So just some resources. Like I said, there's tons and tons of information available at the university's electronic data information system. Usually what I just do is I type into Google UFLEDIS. It will give me a link to this website, and then there's a search box on the homepage of the website where you can either type in this publication number or you can type in the subject matter, and it will take you to those publications. So palm morphology and anatomy, which we covered in the first part of the webinar, the nutrient deficiencies of landscape and field-grown palms in Florida, nutrition and fertilization of palms in containers. Not all landscape fertilizers are created equal. This is very heavy lifting, but it's fascinating. You know, I'm not a chemistry person by any stretch of the imagination, but I just found it really, really interesting to read. Transplanting palms in the landscape, pruning palms, and then hurricane damaged palms in the landscape care after the storm. Or you could just buy the book. This is Dr. Broshot's book. He wrote it with Dr. Alan Miro. It is probably the most definitive, most comprehensive palm horticulture book out there. It's probably the first of its kind, and it is excellent. You can get it at the University of Florida's bookstore, and you can order that online. So with that, I just invite you to join me next week. We're going to talk about diseases, disorders, and insect pests of palms and goofy palm things that are normal, and that will be a week from today. So,
all right, Amy, we did have one question. Somebody had a question about ferns growing on their palm stems and whether or not they should remove them.
No, that's perfectly normal. That's perfectly normal, assuming that it is a fern. If it is a strangler fig, you probably want to get it out of there. Strangler figs are very distinctive looking. Because that will eventually kill that palm. But the ferns are not a problem at all. I mean, some people really like the look. They're not taking away anything from the tree. They're kind of epiphytic, as we say. They live on air. Right, any other questions?
Nope, that was it. All right, thank you so much.
All right, well, great. Thank you all for joining.